What is perfectly legal but feels creepy as hell? Alright guys, I want to start this one off with a content warning. There is some stories in here that talk about mistreatment of minors, things like beauty pageants and whatnot, and this first story we're going to get into is one of those stories. So I just wanted to give the heads up for the trigger warning in case some people are going to be disturbed by some of the stories in here, because there's some weird ones. Now with that said, let's jump in. Story 1. Exploiting your kids for fame on social media. I've seen the parents coaching kids before when they didn't realize the camera was still recording and accidentally uploaded the video without editing it. I remember that mom who kept telling her son to cry harder, look more sad because his dog died, and the kid finally got fed up and yelled at her, "I am sad." Ugh, it was disgusting. It makes me think of the influencer girl suffering from an eating disorder with her mother enabling her and supporting her not to seek treatment, but letting the disorder run freely. It's heartbreaking, and I can't even comprehend why the mother is allowed to keep her daughter from getting better, while also inspiring other people to start messing around with their daily intake of calories. It's disgusting and dangerous, and I feel so bad for this poor girl. I truly hope she will get away from her abusive mother and be able to start her healing. Story 2. People fighting like mad to get the dog in the divorce and then turning it over to a shelter out of spite for their partner. Although now in California there can be serious consequences for doing that due to recent law changes about pets and divorce, but it wasn't always that way. Story 3. Lawyer here. I once had a client drink another person's unflushed pee from a public toilet. The judge clearly hated that he had to dismiss my client's case, and it was a weird one to defend. Edit. Lots of great questions, but I'm going to go with what I learned at an MCLE training from Michael Jackson's lawyer. No comment is never the wrong answer. Story 4. Walking into an elevator and not turning around. I've always wanted to enter a crowded elevator, stand by the entrance looking in as the door closes behind me and say, "I bet you're all wondering why I gathered you here." At Disneyland, when they used to have the Tower of Terror, they'd either have you walk upstairs or take regular elevators to get up to the loading platform for the actual ride. Usually a cast member would act creepy or silly and say fun things as the elevator doors closed. One time, one of the bellhops on staff stepped in and just faced inward towards us. Didn't say anything, just stared and slowly smiled more and more. And when the doors opened, they took a step back and gestured where to walk, never breaking the creepy smile or thousand-yard stare. It was perfectly unsettling. Story 5. Child beauty pageants. My parents put me in a beauty pageant when I was 7. The school reports from my teachers and verbal reports from my parents, as well as others around me, note that after that whole shtick, I became friendlier, more outgoing, and far more personable. But that's not what I remember. What I remember is having to hold hands with someone's clammy, sweaty mitts that always smelled like hair gel. What I remember is the humiliation as I was given instructions that were obvious to adults but made no sense to a child. What I remember is competing against 16-year-olds who were mean and awful to us little ones, getting my lunch stolen and told that I couldn't have more. Of course nothing happened to these kids. I was 7, but small enough that I could pass for 5. The bully was 16 and could easily pass for early 20s. I made one friend the entire 9 months that I was signing up for these pageants, and she was the only good thing about that whole experience. She was like 10, but, older than me. She had options for friends her age if she wanted them, but she stayed close to me and made sure I was safe because she saw I was the smallest kid and that I was all alone. What others saw and what I experienced were vastly different things. Becoming friendlier and more personable was not a good thing because it was me learning how to mask my true feelings while my emotional energy and joy for life dwindled. I naturally enjoy hanging out with a small circle of people, but I don't like masking small talk or being overly social. Obviously, extroversion is a desirable characteristic, so let's not question a good thing. If they questioned it, then maybe they would have understood that the extroversion that came from that experience was not a desirable trait, but a defense mechanism. Story 6. Smelling a seat when someone stands up from it. I saw a man do this on the subway once. A woman got up from her seat, and he rushed over in plain view of all of us and pressed his cheek into the warm spot. Story 7. Sitting at a pool with a camera, fully clothed. Being on the receiving end of this is just angering. Dude in his mid-60s, employed at the DoD contractor campus where I work, set up his deck chair facing the exit of the ladies' locker room. Now, I'd already noticed him when he'd come to the campus gym and work out shirtless, going around asking women how old they thought he was. He also helped a lot of women with their weightlifting technique, whether they wanted it or not. Anyways, I had noticed he was sitting in his deck chair multiple times over the course of a week, watching women as they came out of the locker room. Then, suddenly, one day in the locker room, the furniture was rearranged, so the towel shelf was moved closer to the lockers, and the bench that we use to change into our suits, where we temporarily are fully naked as we change out of our daily clothes into our swimwear, was moved to be totally visible when the exit door was opened. That dude was a full-on creep. So glad he was dismissed after I and multiple women complained about him. Story 8. I babysat for a couple that had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old who both still breastfed. They were pretty normal otherwise. I don't even mind extended breastfeeding, like the 3-year-old was. But a 6-year-old? Seeing that 6-year-old pull down her mother's shirt and latch was just plain creepy. Story 9. Tabloid journalism. Speculating random BS things about famous people off creep photos from paparazzi. Speculating about health, relationships, etc. Even going so far as to doctor photos just to sell the story they want. Story 10. Really specific, but this is my job, so I know about it. In the EU, there are lots of restrictions on how you handle animals for research. But there is no restriction on the kind of animal data you use for the research, as long as you didn't collect the data from living animal subjects in an EU member state. This means a researcher from a place with more restrictive laws can conduct research in a place with less restrictive laws, and then bring the data back home to analyze and further use. So you can use data that was drawn from animals living in the most appalling conditions and in contravention with any and all animal welfare standards, and it's perfectly legal. It's called ethics tourism and ethics washing. Story 11. Daddy-daughter purity balls, where the girl is given a ring that she is then supposed to wear after pledging her purity to her father until she says I do, and she's supposed to give the ring back to her dad, as she's given her purity to her husband now. Being friends with someone who grew up in that brainwash scheme sure was eye-opening. Ugh, memory unlocked. In youth group, we were given sugar packets that we were supposed to save to break open on our wedding night, like our virginity. I was really brainwashed, so I saved it for a long time, thinking I'd give it back to my youth pastor when I got married, as proof or something. Until I became an adult and realized how fucking creepy that was, and threw the packet in the trash. I'm so grossed out just thinking about it. Story 12. Dating family members. I have an older sister, and she decided to try and get my whole family in trouble just to date our oldest cousin. That was about 3 or 4 years ago now, and they have a daughter that's I think 1 or 2 currently. Story 13. Filming the scene of accidents while emergency healthcare is being delivered. I once drove past a car accident that had just happened and saw a young man reaching his arm through the driver's side window. I thought maybe he was trying to help the woman inside who was slumped over, not moving, and covered in blood. Nope, he was filming her, shoving the camera in her face, and he posted the video to social media. I later saw on the news that the accident was fatal and the woman had died on scene. Another time, a kid on a moped got hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. As I was on the phone with 911, a crowd suddenly appeared from all directions and started filming on their phones. One single guy from a nearby bar went over to the kid and held his hand and comforted him, telling him that he was going to be okay and that help was on the way. Poor kid was letting out some guttural groans, and it was clear that he was in agony. Kid died right there on the street. EMS worked on him for a long time, and of course, everyone filmed it. The second one haunts me the most because that kid was still alive, terrified, in agony, and was actively dying, while virtually everyone just gawked and filmed. It felt like something out of Black Mirror. His parents had a memorial at the scene of the accident the next day, and he just seemed like such a sweet kid. He just graduated high school days before, apparently, and saved up a long time to buy that moped he was on, just so he could get to and from his job at the grocery store. I hope that footage was never posted on the internet for his heartbroken family to see, but I expect it probably was. Wow, that is messed up. I know people are awful sometimes, but standing around a kid after a crash like that, just filming him? I don't really want to believe that one's true, but part of me says it probably is. God, how horrible. If you're on a public sidewalk, you can film through people's windows into their house. There is no expectation of privacy for anything that can be viewed from a public space. If you want the inside of your home truly private, close your windows. Story 15. The Troubled Teen Industry. They're hired by parents to facilitate the false improvement of teenagers for many different reasons. They organize transportation through third-party companies who take teenagers in the early hours of the morning, around about 3 a.m. These transportation companies operate across state lines and international borders, yet there is no federal legislation regarding these companies. The conditions in these programs are abusive and neglectful. In wilderness programs, teenagers are expected to live outside, with their only shelter being a tarp and a piece of rope. If anyone wants to learn or is a survivor, there is a subreddit for this, r/troubled teens. Story 16. Religious missionaries going door to door. The whole point of them doing this is so they get yelled at. It's a manipulation tactic used to keep members in the church. They send them door to door, and inevitably a lot of people will justifiably get upset with them or act rude towards them. Then, when they get back to church, they're told, "See, the world is against people like us. The church is the only place you'll ever be accepted, so you have to stay." Huh. Maybe that's why they stopped coming to my door. For a while, I had people come by every so often, and I was always polite. The last time, I was a little baked and still had morning hair and PJs on. I was thirsty, so I said, "I'm gonna grab a glass of water. Would you like some?" I always assumed it was the smell of weed and my generally disheveled aspect. But maybe it was all that combined with me being too nice. Either way, I call that a win. Story 17. In my country, upskirt camera filming, because somehow that's not a reasonable level of privacy to expect when in public. I remember when the initial ruling was made, and apparently the judge felt there was no reasonable expectation of privacy when wearing a skirt in public. Rulings like this just make me feel like the judges are telling on themselves sometimes. Story 18. Women grabbing my arms, butt, and chest while I'm working as a bartender. These disgusting women will get drunk and reach over the bar and grab the men. It is not okay and makes our jobs extremely difficult, and we do not consent to it just because we're being nice to you. Story 19. Looking back on it now, creepy as hell, but when I was in 8th grade, I had a sex dream about a classmate that I wasn't even attracted to. For some reason, I told her the next day, and she simply asked, "Was I loud?" After that, yes, I was attracted to her. Also very glad that it didn't go the way it probably should have, thinking back to how weird that was of me. Okay, now we jump into the rapid fire segment for stories too short to make a full entry out of, but too good to be left out. Let's jump right in. Mowing my lawn in nothing but a Speedo bathing suit. The Trade Federation blockade around Naboo. Marrying a child is legal in 40 US states. Smelling people. Telling the world you would get busy with your daughter if she wasn't your daughter. Employers keeping tabs on your social media. The fact that Epstein's client list hasn't been released. Crawling around in the city wearing a penguin costume covered in mayo. Licking a spill directly from the table. Bankrupting people with healthcare. Religions that are obsessed with the virginity of young girls. Sitting alone at a bus stop at 2 a.m. dressed like a clown. Walking on the streets with a glass of water. So guys, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. I'm ReddList, and I will see you next time.
I was disappointed that neither Bob nor John Wesley were among the dead. But that was short-lived, as a moment later I was facing down the fastest gun in the West.